Hi, and welcome to today's webinar, Open Banking and PSD2. I'm your moderator, Amanda Bierfeld, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator at GT Software. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out via email. Additionally, all listeners are on mute. However, if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box in the right-hand corner, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, COO of GT Software, Steve Hassett.
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome today to our meeting this morning, or afternoon if you happen to be in Europe. The subject today is PSD2 and open banking, and I'm Steve Hassett, Chief Operating Officer of GT Software. Before we start, I want to tell you a little bit about GT Software. We're a 35-year-old software company, and our focus is on mainframes for our entire history. And as you can see on the right of the screen, we work with a lot of very large global companies and global banks. We're trusted by over 2,500 organizations worldwide. And our focus today is on API mainframe integration. And that's what we'll be talking about today in the context of open banking and the reasons to invest in open banking. So our agenda is first, what is open banking at PSD2, what it means to banks, how you create value, then an introduction to APIs, the challenges that API bring to integrating with legacy systems, and the potential solutions. So the first question is, what is open banking at PSD2? PSD2 requires all UK and EU companies to create APIs to securely open their core systems for specific uses. And those uses are account integration service providers and payment initiation service providers, which we'll refer to as AISPs and PISPs. We also think of it as innovation at gunpoint because it's forcing banks to open up their systems when in the past there had been a reluctance to do so. So who is impacted by PSD2? Well, first, it's any UK and EU bank. And according to the directive, any bank that operates in Europe that has a subsidiary in the UK or EU is also subject to PSD2. Now, it's important to note that PSD2 does not prescribe services only access, and that in fact makes it very broad because there's really an unknown range of services that fintechs who use the APIs can provide based on the access. The question is, when does it apply? Well, currently only the 9 largest UK banks are required for UK open banking, but there are actually 36 that are currently offering it, so they've gone beyond the requirement to get a jump on it. PSD2 provides the legal framework under which the UK legislation was created. And PSD2 applies in Europe beginning in September 2019. But obviously banks are preparing for it. The question is, what does it mean to banks? Well, first, it replaces the old model of getting data by sharing log information, by sharing with what's called screen scraping. And so if you're familiar with a product called Mint basically would ask you to enter your login information for your credit cards, for your brokerage accounts, for your banks, so it could aggregate all of this in one place. And when it worked, it was a very, very useful system. But it's also very insecure because you're providing login information and it's all in one place. And it's very vulnerable to hacking. And that's a big concern, which is why PSD2 prohibits screen scraping. And in fact, there's a service in the U.S. called Plaid, which is a pretty big company at this point. And what they do is they provide APIs for fintechs to connect with thousands of banks, but they use screen scraping to do so. And so Plaid will not be permitted in the UK or the EU under PSD2 because it's a screen scraping application. The way it's going to work that's not screen scraping is it's going to give consumers full control over the information sharing, and they can deauthorize it at any time. So if you're interested in authorizing a fintech to access your information, first you create your account with the service provider, And then the service provider directs you to your bank or financial institution where you log in on their website and then authorize the access to your account. And of course, you can at any point deauthorize access to your account. So it gives you full control over the information and how it's being used. And then in terms of payments, in most cases, two-factor authentication is going to be required. Now, banks have options. In North America, they can do nothing. In Europe, they can do the minimum, but that risks just becoming a utility where you have paycheck in and payment out. The alternative is to embrace it and transform customer relationships and develop a stronger bond with your customers. And my belief is that the first banks who embrace API banking are going to become the central to the customer's financial world. They can become the aggregator and not the aggregated, become a central payment hub and not just a recipient and distributor of payments. We believe value creation is in the optional services, going beyond the minimum and developing those stronger relationships with your customers. Right now, European banks are experimenting with APIs under PSD2, and they're testing, and they're learning, and they're gaining advantage. And we don't want North American banks to be left behind. So our prescription is to experiment, partner with innovative fintech companies. Controlling the APIs in this manner actually reduces lock-in for banks and for consumers, because the consumers control the API, so if they want to switch from one provider to another, it's rather seamless. This innovation ultimately benefits consumers, because consumers can get better deals by exposing data, and deals have several definitions. For example, you have a single view in one place, so you can set personal budgets based on real information. You can find shopping deals based on analytics for what you actually spend, and then get it all in one place. Banks can become the aggregator of this information and use that to create debt management tools and recommendations for better products for their customers. And this can even include better loan terms. And you wonder why a bank would want to offer a lower interest rate. Well, it's because they use this data and go beyond FICO scores to do a better job underwriting the risk in their customers and offer the ones who have the most attractive profile a better interest rate, but at the same time, they're reducing their underwriting risk. So they increase their margin even though the loan rates are lower. This is a tremendous potential advantage for banks. The innovation also benefits banks. So by collaborating with fintechs to provide products and services, banks gain an advantage. These are not new ideas. They're things we've been talking about for a long time, but they're actually coming to fruition now. It creates revenue opportunities from these new channels. It offers banks better opportunity to validate their customers under Know Your Customer KYC. It also offers the opportunity for banks to reduce fraud by having more data available to understand whether transactions are real or fraudulent. As we said before, the data analytics will result in better financing and investment products that can be created by the banks, and predictive analytics can be used to recommend products and reduce customer acquisition costs. So if you have an offering that's targeted for a specific customer and is a good fit for their financial circumstance, you can offer a better deal and have a more likely chance of it being taken up. And that, again, increases volume and increases revenue for banks. In addition, direct revenue from premium APIs going beyond the minimum is a real opportunity and providing answers and not just data. There are many sources of revenue, and so it's interesting, even in highly regulated Europe, PSD2 says nothing about whether a bank may charge the PISP for these services. It only specifies and mandates that PISPs are entitled to the same pricing as the bank's retail customers. But going beyond the minimum, there's still the opportunity for revenue share and additional transaction fees and API call fees and even data licensing fees. So this creates real options for banks. First, they can do the minimum. and allow others to take the opportunity, and that would not be recommended. What's recommended is to take the lead, because the alternative to doing the minimum or doing nothing is embracing the change, leading innovation, and mobilizing your teams. There's just one small problem. Is this how you think about your mainframe system, your legacy systems? If it is, you're not alone. When I'm in front of an audience, I ask, who's interacted with a mainframe today? And typically few hands go up because they don't realize that if they swiped a credit card, withdrawn money from an ATM, made a travel reservation, bought stock, transferred money of any kind, they've probably interacted with a mainframe. Because 90 of the top 100 global banks use mainframes as a system of record. Now it's not like this anymore with big boards and tapes and developers wearing suits. Mainframes today are fast and secure and reliable in everything a fintech needs. They just need to connect. And that brings us to an introduction to APIs. And we think of APIs as the bridge from legacy to leading edge. An API gives you access to programs, but hides the complexity. And the API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's really just a small program that provides access, not just to data, but for creating transactions and moving money and making payments. And it's a good thing they're there because legacy systems are forever. So while this is the Wall Street Journal, September 25th, 2018, while a bunch of smaller banks have successfully ripped out their old core processing systems, no major bank has dared to do so, and that's still true today. And the reason is because there are 220 billion with a B, lines of COBOL code currently being used in production today. And what's more surprising is that number is growing by about 1.5 billion lines per year. So there's more usage, not less usage of COBOL. And those systems, they handle $3 trillion in commerce per day. That's trillion with a T. And it's a hard number to get your head around. So think of it this way. The GDP for China for a year is less than $12 billion. So in 4 days of transactions, COBOL systems have exceeded the size of China's entire economy. The U.S. economy is about 19 trillion in GDP. So in 7 days, COBOL systems have processed more than the entire U.S. economy produces in GDP in a year. It's really an amazing number. And despite that, mainframes still have the reputation of being expensive and antiquated and hard to integrate with. And they're written in languages like COBOL, and they're based on custom applications. And custom applications require custom APIs. So they're often viewed as the obstacle to innovation, with companies constantly looking at how to rip them out. Well, without the proper tools, this is all true. But with the proper tooling and the proper approach, the reality is mainframes are reliable, they are secure, they are fast and scalable. And those custom-built applications, well, they're custom-built for how your business operates, so they're required. And the good news is then you can build new capability around these legacy applications by creating what IDC calls the connected mainframe. So the reality of mainframes is it gives you the best of both worlds. Because a mainframe equals stability, and an API equals agility. So when you add mainframes to API, you get stability and agility, and that's what you want. So let's talk a little bit more about APIs, because there's a lot of confusion about the different components. So at the top, you actually have the API, which is the small program that's accessed by developers to access your core systems. Below that, you have external API management tools, and you're familiar with names like Apogee and CA API Manager and Red Hat's 3Scale. Well, those are used for creating self-service portals and developer registration and sandboxes and key management and usage management and lifecycle management, throttling the APIs, providing analytics. They're critical. Below that, you have another area that we call that is called enterprise service buses, ESBs, or integration platforms. And those are things like IBM MQ and MuleSoft and Oracle. Now, those can connect to a mainframe, but they do so in a way that ends up being very, very time-consuming and very, very complicated because they typically, even with a connector, they require a lot of manual coding to connect to the many applications you have on your mainframe, and it's complicated. It just takes a long time. So by having a specialized tool that connects to your mainframe and can create consolidated, complex, robust APIs that are easier for developers to use, you give yourself an advantage. So these tools, like GT Software's Ivory Service Architect, help you compose and orchestrate mainframes. They provide DevOps tools. They provide platform security, access to the system of record, and deal with all the various ways that you want to try to get at your legacy system. But this begs the question, why is mainframe integration so hard? Well, first, it's because the applications have been around for a really long time. They started on punch cards and moved to green screens and magnetic tape off of teletypes using 80-character wide tables. And I would be surprised if you don't have that code still in your system today. Because while these things were created a long time ago, that code just continues to survive and get used. Then next problem is they're built in different languages, like COBOL and Assembler and PL1. The way people program and develop and architect systems has changed radically many times over the last 50 or 60 years. We have a number of prospective customers who will tell us that their problem is they have these layers and layers of applications that were built under different standards depending on when they were built, and it makes it really complicated to try to access them. And then finally, they're just not at all designed for the API world. Believe it or not, it's very, very difficult to get a COBOL or PL1 program to call to an outside system. And if you want to do things like check for fraud or initiate payments, you need to be able to call the APIs of these outside providers. And we can help our customers do that with just a few lines of code. But it's a very difficult thing to do if you don't have a system that helps you do the access. Then we have a problem with data structures and formats. And it's important to think about the history when you think about this. So you may remember Y2K. Y2K was an issue because in order to save space, software developers created date fields that only had 2 characters for the year. So 18 referred to 1918, 19 referred to 1919, and that was all fine until we started getting close to 2000, and then you didn't know whether it referred to 1919 or 2019. Well, that was a problem, and it was a big fear that the entire infrastructure and financial infrastructure of the world would come to a grinding halt on December 31st, 1999. Well, that didn't happen. But that was just one small effort that was made on the part of developers to try to save a little bit of space, 2 characters per record. Well, there are lots of other ways that are even more complex and beyond the scope of this presentation to describe them. But let's think about it in terms of an analogy. There are ways that programs wrote tables and files and data to save space. And it requires the programs to figure out how to decode them. So it's like you wrote an encrypted file or a compressed file on your computer. If you tried to read that without the decryption program, you wouldn't know what it said. You need that program to be able to decrypt it. And the software tools help do that without having to write specific parsers and programs in order to decrypt everything that's from those legacy systems. The third way is that sometimes the programs are actually built into the screens and they contain important logic for the operation of these applications. And it's often the easiest way to integrate is to actually go through this screen layer. And while you may not want to do this, it's usually beneficial to have at your disposal a range of options for developing integrations. So you're not writing a lot of complex code. In order to try to understand more depth in the scale of this problem, we had a survey done last year asking about the backlog of APIs and integration challenges, and it had revealed some really interesting insights. 30% of the people that mainframe development shops that we surveyed had more than 50 APIs in development. 9% have over 500. 75% thought it took more than 40 hours each to develop them. 25% more than 250 hours each API. And one said 4,000 hours each. That's an incredible number, but that's what they told us. 20% have more than 50 APIs in backlog, not yet in development. Now, what this didn't touch on is the fact that every one of these APIs that gets built becomes a program. And those programs need to be changed and modified and maintained over time as system requirements change. So it's a huge effort to try to keep on top of this. And on top of that, there are a lot of other integration challenges because almost 50% of the respondents can't find the staff to work with existing applications. And of course, they face budget constraints. And that result in low internal customer satisfaction because they're not delivering at the same time, with the same time expectations their customers would like. And this is further exasperated by organizational silos. And a lot of this is a problem of perception. So the mainframe teams that we work with think they're operating at full, or that our prospects often think they're operating at a full level of efficiency. And in many ways they are because they're really busy and they're knocking these things out and they're 100% utilized. But if you're waiting for development and your API is not getting developed, you don't think they're efficient. And there's a gap. There's a perception gap there. So a friend of mine is a software developer, and he says to me, I went to my mainframe team, and I asked them to develop APIs for me. And what they responded is, okay, we can do that, but tell us what to stop doing. Well, what I told him is don't accept that as an answer, but obviously it was a hard thing for him to push back. But the problem is not whether he pushed back, but the underlying belief is the only way to do more is to throw more bodies at the problem. And they don't have the budget for more bodies. And the only way to solve the problem is to write programming. And well, that's not really the only answer. Now, where does this come from? It comes from corporate culture, organizational silos that say stay in your lane. If you're in a big company, this is usually the culture. And of course, all mainframe companies are big companies. So we see this culture all over the place. The problem is, if you want to drive results, you need to get out of your lane and you need to help your colleagues perform better to serve you better so that you can develop innovation at the pace you need. Otherwise, results are going to lag. You need to help your colleagues think outside the box. So we advise getting out of your lane, but looking both ways before you do. Because the truth is, integrations can be accelerated, but the tools, in our experience, have a very low level of awareness. And sometimes the productivity improvements that they can bring can be viewed as a threat because the teams think, well, they're just going to replace us. Well, in fact, nothing can be further from the truth. But they don't know what's coming, so it's hard for them to react. And it's why we encourage sharing a vision. So I'll share two stories with you from real prospective customers. One, a CIO of a large company referred us to their mainframe development team to evaluate our product. The mainframe team said, well, that's really interesting, but we don't have any projects. Well, we went back to the CIO, and the CIO said, oh, yeah, well, they just don't know about them. Well, they need the vision shared with them so they know what the purpose is of the evaluation, obviously. The second example is I was in Europe last summer, and I met with a number of prospects and customers, big global banks. And I asked, what are you doing to prepare for PSD2? Are you familiar with PSD2? And they weren't. Now, obviously, they were doing things to prepare for it, but they didn't really know the why. They didn't understand the long-term vision, so they weren't as prepared as they could be. And this is a problem because it might look like a very expensive product or a somewhat expensive product for someone, who's running a small team. But if it's in the way of overall innovation for the entire enterprise and part of what might be a 9-figure project, and they are 9-figure projects, it's a rounding error. So as an example, let's say you own the roofing company, and you're trying to increase the productivity of your roofers because you have a lot of business. And you got a bunch of guys on top of the roof hammering nails into shingles to try to replace roofs on your customers' houses. And well, they're working as hard as they can, so you don't know how you can accelerate it. And then someone comes along and says, why don't you try a nail gun? What is a nail gun? Well, it shoots in nails into the roof much faster than anyone can do with a hammer. And so suddenly you found a way to take the existing team and make them much more productive. And I think of what we do as like a nail gun, well, except for software development and integration. And that's how we can help. We can complete the pathway from legacy to leading edge, help you build powerful APIs that automate workflows and orchestrate the interactions of lower-level APIs. And do this by making your crew more productive, not adding resources, but enable them to build APIs 5 times faster at a fifth the cost of other solutions, a fifth the cost because you're making your people more productive, and at the same time, reduce usage on the mainframe. It's overall a very valuable proposition because we help make everything work together. So our primary competition is a lot of coding, where you can build web services in days or months or weeks, as opposed to our tool, which enables you to build web services in hours or minutes and prototype instantly. What we hear from our customers is they like us because we make it easier for them to accomplish their tasks. Again and again, compared to all the tools they've evaluated, that's what they say is the most important thing about working with us. And we've helped a lot of big companies, and you can see the names of some of these companies we've worked with, a lot of big banks and a lot of other companies from different industries. So let's wrap up and let's talk about solution do's and don'ts. First, do embrace the change. For PSD2, it's coming, and it's incumbent on you to embrace that change and lead. Second, as a business owner, do collaborate with legacy teams. Don't accept throw bodies at it as a solution, because it's not the only solution. And don't accept if we do this, we need to stop doing that. Don't accept coding your way out of it as the only solution, because it's not. Do ask, what if you could build APIs with less effort? What if I gave you a nail gun? Do help them find the right tools, and then help them buy that nail gun so they can be more productive and serve you better. And share that vision. So in review, PSD2 and open banking are coming. The opportunity, though, lies beyond the base requirements to create new revenue streams and drive innovation. APIs are the bridge from legacy to leading edge. And legacy systems can be hard to integrate without the right tools, but those tools are available to radically improve productivity of your teams. Silos exist and they must be broken down. As a business owner, do collaborate with your legacy and IT teams, and do share that vision. And with that, I'm going to go back to Amanda to see if we have any questions.
Great job, Steve. We actually have 3 different questions. The first one is, how would products like Ivory help safeguard customer information versus screen scraping?
Well, screen scraping is inherently risky. And Ivory is built from the ground up from the first days we developed the project to create secure integrations with mainframes. Uh, and they're trusted by some of the largest banks in the world, and basically the approach that's agreed, approved by regulators in order to integrate with legacy systems.
Another question for you, Steve. I'm a U.S. bank. How will PSD2 affect us?
Well, to some extent that remains to be seen. But if you're a U.S. bank and you have a European subsidiary, it affects you now, because any bank that has a subsidiary operating in the UK or the EU is going to have to comply with the regulation. And if you're a U.S. bank, well, obviously you have the opportunity to take the lead on open banking.
Great. And the last question, I've heard about API management tools like MuleSoft. Does Ivory compete with MuleSoft, or is it a complementary technology?
That's a great question. I mean, we really don't compete with ESBs like MuleSoft or TIBCO. They're designed to help with integrations across all the platforms in your organization, as opposed to being a specialized tool to connect to your mainframe. And their ability to connect with the mainframe is very complex. What we hear from and this is validated by our customers who say, yeah, we've used these other tools, and they're hard to use, and they're complicated, and they require training, and require much more knowledge of the underlying systems than what we do. And then that's the value we bring to our customers, and how we complement things like MuleSoft and TIBCO.
Great. And we just want to thank you guys for joining our webinar today, and have a great rest of your day.